Well, welcome, Erica. How do you pronounce your last name? Sewell or
Sewell, like Jewel.
Sewell? I should
As
know this
long
by
as
now.
you've known me, I've
Yeah,
known you
yeah.
for over a
I've never,
decade.
I've never had to say, I never had to use that last name. The government has always been Erica. So Sewell, got it,
Yes,
got it, got it.
like Jewel. Just
Sewell,
think about
like
Jewel.
Jewel Sewell.
Yes.
Well, welcome to the Brooklyn Boardroom. It's a pleasure to have you in here with me because, I know you, we know each other personally, obviously, for many years, and I respect your grind. I respect your professionalism. I respect your perspective and what you've accomplished. So I'm excited to have you in this conversation, this dialogue. I think it's going to be really dynamic. So
Thank you for
welcome.
having me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So for those who may be new to listening or watching, this is the Brooklyn Boardroom where we kind of break down the entertainment business from the executive's point of view or the producer's point of view or whoever the guest is, the creator's point of view. And today we're going to be talking about, basically the, I actually didn't have a caption for this episode, but we're going to create one right now. But what Eric is here to do for us is kind of explain to us the world of the entertainment landscape as she sees it when she's developing relationships for recruitment in various organizations she's worked for. Right now, she's an executive at Netflix in recruitment. So Erica, tell us a little bit about what you presently do and then how you got to be doing what you've done. Because by the way, I counted on your resume, I had to. You had 16 jobs. This is like your 16, and that's not in a bad thing, but I'm like, I had to, because I was like, wait a minute. You know how you're on LinkedIn and it lets you keep going and going? I was like, wait, what? I was like, I knew about that. I ain't know about that. And then I noticed the pattern. I was like, wait, okay, so 1 minute she's in this admin capacity. She works for a school. She's in fashion. She's in art. She's an exec at media. I'm like, yo, I need you to explain this because I think most people would love to hear how you've been able to navigate these worlds so fluidly.
Yeah. Well, the LinkedIn, even though it's a lot, unfortunately, that's the truncated version, I have to say.
Okay.
So
Oh,
there's still a
really?
lot more that
There's a
just
lot
is
more to
not on
tell.
there.
Okay.
But, in the interest of time, basically what I do now is I work on the content creative talent acquisition team for Netflix. And that basically means I hire creative executives across the company. So series, film, music. I was also doing that for awards, animation, creative execs, and casting, all of the things that kind of touch developing and procuring the content. So that's the folks that I hire and the relationships that I develop there. Prior to Netflix, I've had, like you said, a lot of different trajectories. But in my recruiting years, which is probably the last decade of my life, I've worked for CBS Interactive, doing, the same thing, Williams-Sonoma Inc., like Ann Taylor. So basically I went from like fashion recruiting to tech and entertainment recruiting. And then prior to being a recruiter, I was in higher education. And prior to that, I was a designer. So that's what you're kind of referring to. How I got there, I've always been a creative person. I started out as a fashion designer for a decade. Then I was at a point, I think we were talking about earlier before we started the show, about just like the American fashion industry and not really feeling like I could be creative enough. So after 10 years in the business, I left my post at Isaac Mizrahi for Target, where I was the head designer. And I just was like, you know what? I went to Calvin Klein. I started doing freelance work, but I was just not fulfilled because it was just so much work to do, like to update last year's bestseller, to move a pocket from one side to another. It wasn't really that innovative. And I'm spending all this time and energy making someone else rich, right? Over some clothes. So what I wanted to do, what I realized I liked is people development, not product development, right?
Okay.
So I wanted to see more of us in the fashion industry at the time. I knew all the Black designers in New York at that time. I could count them on two hands in terms of who was actually in the industry, not just kind of doing their entrepreneur stuff, particularly outside of urban, as they called it. And I just was like, nah, this is the only reason we don't see a lot of us is because we don't know this is a career path, right? So I started thinking about that. I had a whole bunch of weird departures, like teaching art, and I was like managing Micheline Thomas's studio because I've always been into art. But then I started working at Parsons, and that's when I got into higher education. And that's also it was also a nice bridge to get a master's for free. So
Yeah,
if I was gonna be broke,
Yes,
I might as well get a master's for free at the
smart
new
move.
school. So
That's
yeah.
amazing.
So I went from higher ed, and then after working in higher ed, because of the capacity I was working in was career services. That's kind of like pseudo recruiting, and so that's how I
Okay.
bridged to recruiting.
I see. So
Yeah.
this kind of begs the question. So you've like worked in all these various organizations in these various capacities in various cities, but thinking about it from an organizational standpoint, like culturally, like what would be some of the distinct differences, especially if we're talking to people who are thinking about going into art, going into fashion, going into media, but working for a major organization in those places? Culturally, what do those differences feel like?
Well, it's interesting because when I think about my current situation, Netflix has a very unique culture. So I can't even really label that as the typical entertainment business culture, because I think we actually pride ourselves on not being that.
Okay.
Prior to Netflix, I was at, CBS Interactive. And even though Interactive is a part of CBS Corporation, it's still the tech arm. So it's a little different culturally. And I think the main difference, I think, is anytime there's like technology and innovation involved, there seems to be sort of, or depending on where the proximity is, right? So both of those are on the West Coast in California where there's tech industries. There's a lot of competition to have really good cultures in tech companies. And when I say good cultures, I mean like fair, equitable, inclusive, lots of perks, lots of resources, all of the things. Everybody's encouraged to kind of think bigger and faster and stronger. That's very different from retail and very different from higher ed. I mean, you're in higher ed now. I'm not gonna have you out yourself, but even though higher ed is higher ed, it's also, even though it's like this culmination of thinkers, sometimes it can be very, very like antiquated and process oriented and stuck in its way. And I think that's due to a lack of resources sometimes, right? And a lot of hierarchy. So that's, and then the fashion industry, I've always worked for like major labels, and it's still retail businesses, right? So at the end of the day, retail is like a burn and churn thing, I think, so those cultures can be pretty, and especially I was doing this at a time, I mean, early 2000s. So it's kind of like at a time in New York, everybody was grinding, people weren't getting paid a lot. And there were a lot of opportunities at that time. So I feel like culturally, people weren't really that invested in being, I used to see like Isaac Mizrahi threw scissors on set one day and like almost grazed my nose. So
Are
that
you
should tell
serious?
I can tell you that's like culture. That would never happen at Netflix. You know what I mean? Like never.
But I've heard similar stories at talent agencies, though. Staplers. I'm sure you have too.
Yeah. So I would probably equate the fashion industry at that time, at least, unless you're talking about like something that is a tech fashion, like a Everlane or something like that, right?
Okay.
But the fashion industry, in my opinion, is akin to like how the music industry used to be, how agencies used to be, or kind of still can be.
I see.
Where it's not a lot of like protection, I don't think.
Got it. You're kind of out there, sink or swim, right?
Yeah, basically.
Survive on your own.
Yeah.
Baptism by fire. Okay, well that's really, I mean, that's good to know because again, these experiences can be so different based on who's populating the organizations and then the culture kind of undergirding and the energy, you know what I mean? And I think oftentimes, young people will decide down a path, but not factor in, can I thrive in that environment based on who I am as a person? You know what I'm saying? Is this in alignment with, my, personality? You know what I'm saying? If it's not, can I step up to the plate and be the kind of person I got to be to distinguish myself and succeed in that environment, right? Because without knowing much about fashion in the world you were in or not in other areas, I'm pretty sure you would need to be pretty bold to make yourself be heard, known, felt, and impact. And the same is true, I'm sure, in a lot of environments, entertainment business. You know what I mean? So especially in talent agency.
The good news is that as a creative in those jobs, I feel like you do have more of a voice because it's quite subjective and it's quite democratic. Everyone is looking at that same garment being fit and everybody is weighing in on it. So that, I think, even though it's a hierarchical, stodgy organization, it does bring about, like, as the creator, you have to have a voice, right? I feel like, you know, when I was at CBS, even, like I said, even though it was interactive, it was more corporate. And you know what corporate means? Corporate means, like, well, we've never done it this way, so therefore
everything is in a box. You know what I mean? Here's play in this box. It's funny. This leads me to the next question I have for you, which you've already kind of answered, which is like, is there a role, job, or career path you felt that did not serve you in the way you originally envisioned it would, and why was that? You know?
Yeah. You know what's interesting about my career, I have to say, is the only thing I ever wanted to be for a long time was a fashion designer, and once I accomplished that, I guess that's the one thing. Because the rest, everything I've done since then has been by, I don't want to say it's by design, and I don't want to say it's by coincidence. It's somewhere in between. Like, it just flowed, right? It's like a relationship I make with someone who goes on to this thing and thinks that I'm a good person who could adapt, and therefore I'm now in a new industry. But
interesting.
Or like, I even to become a recruiter, I was very resistant to that concept. I became a recruiter because I was consulting for FIT at their career services department, and I got tapped by a recruiting firm who was like, you used to be a designer. We need, for one of these clients, an ex-designer to recruit for them because they don't trust recruiters, because recruiters don't understand the portfolios.
Wow, interesting.
And I would say, whatever your field is, like, if you are a practitioner, right? So if you currently are an executive in media, you're probably going to be the best recruiter for executives in media.
Very true. Very true. Well, let me ask you this before we jump deeply into, you know, the work you do present day, as we transition out of like discussing fashion. You know, I don't know if you paid attention much to the industry at all and how it's changed, but would you say, for those aspiring designers, those aspiring, I don't know, garment, I mean, I don't even know what the terminology is, but people who aspire to be in that business, would you say, especially if they're from a marginalized aspect of society, whatever, would you say that, you know, the opportunities abound even more so than when you were in it? Or would you say it's still kind of a small niche? And I say this with the context of, and I always go back to this, I laugh every time I hear it, you know, Kanye's comment, it ain't Ralph though, you know what I mean? Him trying to bang down the doors of the major fashion houses and getting ignored no matter how much money he spent because he wasn't one of them. So, you know, what is the state of the union in that world, would you say?
Well, to me, what we talked about earlier in terms of inclusivity and culture, there's more of a push in tech and entertainment for inclusivity and diversity than there is for fashion practitioners. The push for diversity in fashion, to me, is more about models. That's the clear and present one. It's not about who's behind it, right? You don't have corporations. You don't have, like, Gucci hired a diversity chief, but that's because they came under fire. You know what I mean? For that sweater. So it's not like being in diversity is a big thing that happens in fashion that much. Like, Ralph has diversity officer, but that's someone who kind of made that position, who had been a longstanding HR person there. So it's not as much of a priority for those companies to hire Black designers, for example. It's just not, unless something happens. It's more reactive. I feel like there's more of a blatant push in the entertainment industry and in the tech industry. But to that point, I think the main disenfranchisement of anyone getting into any of these fields really is based on the socioeconomics of the country, right? It's if you're a first generation college student and you telling your parents you're going to major in art in college, they're like, what are you talking about? You know, that doesn't sound sustainable, but that's because there's a lack of knowledge that this could be a really, you know, wealth generating career.
Totally. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you know, you can look at it from the other point of view, as we talked about, like with entertainment, like you tell your parents you want to be an actor. They're like, what are you talking about? You want to be a writer? What are you talking about? Director? It's like, no. You know, we don't have the luxury for you to roll roll the dice in your career in something so creative. Focus on, lawyer, doctor, engineer, accountant. And obviously, those careers are great careers, but they don't necessarily, generally speaking, open up the vast opportunities to control the businesses as oftentimes the creative space does. Shonda Rhimes is what I'm saying. Like, we think about we look at the business and there's probably, I'd love to see a study on this. Maybe you've seen one. I'm curious to know. I think I already know the answer though. But if you do a comparison between the number of people of color or black men, even better, black men on screen in the entertainment business as like a lead or co-lead or, 30, vis-a-vis black men in the boardrooms and the senior executive ranks across the industry, I'm pretty sure you're going to find a lot more in the actor pool than you find in the executive ranks pool, even though people like you are probably looking to change that.
Yeah, I think you'll find more in the actor pool because that's what Black folks see. And that's what they know. So that's what they might pursue, right? But okay, how many are successful out of those Black actors?
Yeah.
Probably the same amount that are successful as Black executives, a very small pool.
Yeah, maybe the ratio is accurate. Maybe
because the trajectory of being an executive still in Hollywood, in my opinion, means that at some point you maybe have to sacrifice some money, right? If you go the traditional route.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like if you started at, CAA as an assistant, you were making very almost an unlivable wage.
Yeah, breadcrumbs for sure.
Yeah. And if you went to college, you might not be able to afford to do that. And that's the real reason that there's such a deficit, in my opinion. It comes down to that socioeconomics again.
You're right. Yeah, you have to have one of my previous lives, I was a district attorney, and it was funny. And the salary was barely above the poverty line, literally very barely. And the irony was that a lot of, and it's great training, great skills for being a lawyer, but a lot of the men and women who come from these marginalized communities who don't have resources couldn't afford to take such a low paying job to build their skill set in that environment. They had to go to the law firms because they needed to pay rent, pay off their debt, whatever. And you miss out on opportunities, whether it's you want to be in public service and you care about it, but you just can't afford it because it's not, you're not sitting on a stack of bread or your parents aren't supporting you that way. Or, so you see it. And then again, these same people may want to be agents, but you got to go through a training program and make breadcrumbs, but you can't sustain that based on your situation. So you miss out on those opportunities and you end up doing the more traditional path, the more stable path, which again leads you to successful places if you work hard, but not necessarily where you could have gone with yourself.
That's right. I mean, look at who's successful and look at their routes. Look at Ava. Ava was a publicist. In her life, she's transitioned. Look at Sean. They're not people who went through the traditional way. They kind of transitioned over once they got to a certain level, or they just, got a good break, right?
Yeah. But the funny thing is, and I'm sure they would attest to it, a lot of work. I'm sure they would say, you know what, I could have popped a lot sooner, or I could have done it this other way, but there was no path for people like me. You know what I mean? They didn't fit the mold, or whether it was ageism, sexism, racism, whatever, so they had to literally build, blaze a trail on their own. Again, in the case of Ava, where she has a thriving, or had, or maybe still has, I don't know, thriving career as a publicist, and had to from scratch build her career as a director using her own funds and relationships and yada, yada, yada. So, and that's often how we are able to break through and break in. So, but interesting. So let me ask you this. I'm jumping back into kind of your skill set and your focus on a day-to-day. So how would you describe the skills that make you effective in your job as a Netflix recruiter? And I ask this question from the context of, there are people that want to maybe follow in your footsteps, but also people that you and other recruiters that you're interacting with, who need to understand kind of what makes you tick, what are you focused on, why is it that you've been able to be so successful in this role?
I think in general, my parents were both professionals. So I've always had unlike a lot of my peers, I've always had people to bounce things off of, whether it be to interview to get the job or to navigate once I have the job. You know, like people who have been through these things, been through corporate, whatever. In terms of my current role, I feel like by the time, you know, I'm a career changer. I've pivoted 50,000 to 11 times.
16, well, maybe 16 plus
50,
times.
11 times.
Yeah.
So what it does, I think at this age, I'm a woman of a certain age, like what I think happens is I just have developed a confidence in my ability because I have been able to be thrown a new career and, you know, not sink. So when I go into trying to get a new position, usually I already have a position. So it's like, you know,
you're not coming from desperate. Well, it's important.
Yeah,
it's important.
There's no
You're
desperation. There's no desperation.
There's no look of hunger in your eyes. Like, I need this.
Yeah, and frankly, I actually believe that I'm capable. So I think that since I believe it, other people do believe it.
Of course they do. Of course they do.
And I was terrified when I first came to Netflix because that's literally I've never worked at a company where every single person is smart.
I've heard you say that before. Yeah.
Like, and this is why I'm so happy there, right? Because I actually feel like I'm using my whole brain for once.
Being challenged.
But like, it was intimidating at first because I think a lot of us are used to being one of the smartest people in the room, you know? But now I'm kind of like, I'm actually like jazzed by this. I'm not intimidated by it. I'm like, ooh, tell me more. I have more questions. What do you think? You know, like, so I think that's what's made me, you know, not drown so far is confidence, curiosity, and like also just wanting to learn from dope people around me all the time. And like the environment and culture is one where you can literally put time on anyone's calendar and just say, hey, I just wanted to meet with you. I want to pick your brain. So that happens internally all the time. And I think that really helps me.
You know, another thing too, I imagine, we talked about this off camera, but I have to imagine that, you know, you being so well versed in various areas of industry, business, the world, art, fashion, music, you know, the list goes on, travel, that it gives you other languages to communicate with people on, or other levels, better yet, and to help relate, connect organically, build a relationship, and then really suss out where you're at in terms of recruiting someone or collaborating with a colleague. So I think, you know, there's to be a real emphasis on, you know, the cultivation of us all, cultivating who we are to make us interesting, informed, educated, insightful. And that in of itself has real value and currency, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I definitely think about that when I'm speaking to candidates. As you know, as a recruiter, I've always thought about, what is the value add of this person? Are they going to be the same as everyone else who's already here? Are they going to bring something new and interesting and different? Especially, we're talking about creatives. So we're talking about actual storytellers. I want to know what kind of stories you're going to tell. And the type of stories you want to tell are usually informed by your life experience, frankly.
Totally.
Right?
Totally. You know, that's so true. I mean, I guess this also dovetails into the next question, which is, you know, what are some of the personality traits or personality types or dispositions that make for a positive impact on you when you're looking to recruit people?
I think there's a balance between being confident and not cocky. Right? Like humility is also really, really, to me, great. And especially in this business where, you know, it's Hollywood. Like,
everyone got chip on their shoulder.
Well, it's just also people really want to like give you all the things that they are and they've done and people they know and all that. And that's not usually impressive to me. I like to know how people think. And I think also just really being curiosity is huge. I think smart people are curious. Smart people ask questions. They don't just ask questions to ask questions. They ask questions that are thoughtful. and articulate. They don't ask questions that have already been answered or that they could Google.
Mm-hmm.
They ask like, what's behind the curtain questions, or how do you guys think about this questions, or what's the future of that question? You know, because if they're thinking like that now before they come to work for a company, they're going to be thinking like that in the company. And I think there's a curiosity that I think people who are curious thrive.
So would you say, in what's your tenure there? How long you been there? How many years now?
2 years.
2 years?
Over 2 years.
Over 2 years. And then with CBS, I mean, was it CBS Interactive?
Yep.
And that was how
I was
long?
with them for almost 4 years.
4 years. So collectively, recruiting in media is 6 years, right?
In media, yes.
In media, 6 years. So, you know, we often hear the refrain that, you know, the Hollywood people are not intelligent and self-absorbed and yada, 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 yada. You know, a lot of, you know, cronyism, nepotism, all that stuff. But like, having been on the ground, engaging, you know, in the marketplace with various people, do you feel as though like how would I say this? Is it challenging to find just the right candidate for your organization, whether it was CBS, whether it's Netflix, or are there common hurdles on that journey that you seem to always encounter because that's the nature of our business?
It's always challenging finding the right candidate, even before I got in media. That's why I like that. I think that's why I stayed in this job, because I like to be challenged. I think that it's more challenging if you're not working for a company that can offer a lot.
Oh yeah, of course.
So, you know, in the past when I've been in recruiting, I've been trying to sell the company because I'm always looking at the best person who's very sought after. Yeah. Now I'm still looking at the best person who's sought after, but I really don't have to sell the company as much because they might also be seeking us, you know?
Totally.
The challenge that has been recurring to me since I started recruiting has been, again, that equity issue in terms of experience of people of color. Really wanting to, whether it's a mandate or whether it is my observation of the team needing to be diversified and me kind of pointing that out to a hiring manager, me trying to find a huge slate of candidates that are diverse in for certain roles throughout my career, whether it's a furniture designer at Williams-Sonoma Inc. or whether it's a comedy exec, stand-up comedy exec. You know, now it is a challenge because systemically we don't have we're not afforded the same opportunities. Frankly.
So we're not surfaced, and then you know you're not gonna get, you know, they're not gonna drop, you know, our names on a regular basis when you make the inquiries around town. You're looking for this, looking for that. We're not gonna be not thought of. You know what I mean?
Well, it's not that. It's just that there's a disproportion
amount of us
that people are afforded. Like at the end of the day, if I'm looking for an apples to apples person in terms of what they've worked on and the quality of what they've worked on, that means that they've had to have been in organizations that had resources.
That's right.
So, or they've had, or they've had, you know, the talent to be able to do things like, you know, being able to like pull certain levels of talent, which is also back to resources. And as you know, all of sort of I'm speaking specifically of, I mean, first of all, Latinx executives is, there's such a disparity of just any Black and brown execs. Like they're out there, there's some great ones, but there's not enough equity in the opportunities they're afforded to be competitive with certain levels of non-people of color.
That's so true.
So what you do is you pivot based on the experience that they have. But sometimes when we're talking about the more senior executive, like they just haven't had that experience. They haven't had the experience. They haven't had the opportunity to have the experience.
And you can't. So, I mean, I can attest to that. No, 100%. Yeah. And then, you know, not to make this all about me, but you know, I was in a job once where the person that was the gatekeeper for me to gain that experience was a person of color. But that particular, my boss at the time was not willing to share the shine and would not get out the way. And so I was being kept in this very, limited, exposure role. And, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah. And another thing is, to that point, even if I find someone who has the experience, that doesn't mean that they're going to be right.
That's right. There's other factors that come into play.
Like you just said, I wouldn't want to hire that person who did that to you, right?
Yeah, totally,
so
totally. Yeah, that
just
person,
because they're a person of color, that's not.
Yeah, they could check all about, went to the right schools, know the right people, got the skills, but that other piece is not what you want in your organization. Which brings me to another, but this brings another question. So you find what you think would be the ideal candidate, sell them up the food chain, so they kind of get the job, they get the offer, right? Whether this is a person of color or not. What are some of the common pitfalls people fall into when starting in a new gig, amongst a very competitive, intelligent, powerful, peer group?
I mean, I've seen a whole range of you talking
imagine.
about fuck ups. I've seen a whole range of them.
Yeah. But the innocent ones,
yeah.
where the person isn't out to do wrong, and they just they think they're doing the right thing, but they just haven't learned this aspect of the game yet. And
it depends on your environment. So there's certain environments where it will serve you to be more vocal. I hear that one a lot. But I also systemically understand why we're not that vocal sometimes. And then also, if you're in an environment that's very hierarchical, then it's harder for you to be vocal, especially as, let's say, a person of color, right? So I think not using your voice, not being strategic about how you voice your concerns, there's a lot of different things that people could do better. Not being honest about what you don't know. So you see yourself, you're trying to act like you have it all together, but then you're screwing something up. Versus just being like, hey, I need help, So that type of stuff happens. All types of things happen. People get very, how do I say? People don't know how to distinguish the power they have in that organization versus the organization, what's good for the organization sometimes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So they're treating it like it's their own company and they can just make decisions out in the streets. And it's no, you should be vetting that with people. Stuff like that.
And it's probably a limited tolerance for these things, especially depending upon the level, the dynamic, the person, and all those things, right? So some people may get a long leash to trip over themselves and recover and become the star child, right? And others, 6 months in, they get that notice, oh, it's not really working out. You know what I mean? We wish you well. So you don't want to be, but my guess would be, just from personal experience, but also just kind of best practices, if you're starting at an organization and there's going to be a bit of a learning curve or cultural adjustment, finding someone or persons, more than one person, that could really just help guide you, whether they're on your team, outside your department, right? Because what you don't want to probably be doing is making decisions in a vacuum without the input from people who've been there a minute, have some influence in the organization and can provide you real insight. Best thing to do, right?
Yeah, so, if you can get mentorship, that's a plus.
But I'm sure, depending on the company, that's not always easy. People got to get their jobs done, right? We ain't got time to hold your hand. So,
well, that goes back to what I said earlier. Whereas, I'm very fortunate because my parents were both professionals.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of friends like that, so I was able to use them, even if they weren't in the organization.
Wow.
Perspectives were very valuable when there weren't mentors within the organization. So having a mentor that's not in the organization can also work.
Totally.
Yeah.
So now we talked about, pitfalls and problems that arise for people who just started in companies. What have you seen, and whether it's anecdotally or just from your own point of view, that have allowed certain people to find themselves on that fast track. You know what I mean? Like how do we,
Relationships.
the
Hmm.
relationships, right?
Who you know.
Coming, who you know in the organization, right?
Who you know in
And
general. It doesn't even have to be in the organization. In the
who you know in
industry.
town, who's
Yeah.
dropping your name? How's such and such doing over there? Oh, that's my
Yeah.
dude. That's my girl. And
Or
yeah.
I came referred via such and such. Okay, well,
So
now we're gonna talk to you because you
yeah,
that's somebody.
that's somebody, and we want to make
Yeah.
sure that you do well here. So we're going to be invested in your success, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, that's key, and that's not something you can create overnight. That takes a lifetime sometimes.
But you know what I've noticed? I mean, I've only been in LA for a little over 2 years, and I'm
Mhm.
from Chicago. I lived in New York 15 years. I am not of the ilk of the like
Mhm.
Hollywood of it all.
Totally.
But I've noticed that people like in New York, and I'm not trying to make a comparison, but I
Mhm.
feel like there was just as many people doing things, but it wasn't all centered around what someone could do for you. It happened by
Yeah.
default.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes here, historically in LA, like everything is about what people can do for you because everybody is in the same industry. So
That's right.
there's more like deliberate, intentional trying to align yourself with people, which is where we get like that fakeness or whatever.
That's right.
But I think if you're a cool person, it doesn't even matter. Like you can just make relationships with people. Like if you're a cool
Yeah.
person,
If
you
you're a
don't
cool
have to like have
person.
it centered around the work stuff. Because by default, so many people are involved in this industry.
Yeah.
So whoever you're socializing with, if you're a cool person, they also probably know cool people, and it's not like about what they can get you all the time.
The sad truth of it, I think, though, is most people come to Hollywood not really knowing who they are
Yeah.
and get sucked up in the vortex of what they are told or taught they should be like in the business. And they pick up really bad habits and burn relationships. And it's not until they grow up, more or less, realize that really wasn't what I needed to be doing. You know what I'm saying? But the damage is done, right? So, but well, let me ask you this. So, and you've already kind of addressed it indirectly, but I want to see, how you respond to this in a pointed way. How does a person survive a politically charged environment, or when they've been scapegoated for the dysfunction within a department or organization? They're innocent. They just kind of a deer in the headlights. Maybe they have a call. Maybe they have a senior mentor they can call in the business, in the organization, at home. But end of the day, the target's on their back, and they don't have but so long that they'll be able to stay afloat under those circumstances. What would you recommend for that person?
Well, again,
Mm.
it's tricky for me because I'm at a woman of a certain age, and I'm at a
Mhm.
stage in my life where I do believe that I'm a value add at companies.
Mhm.
So if
Mhm.
I'm not being treated properly at a company and there's a lot of fuckery going on, I'm not
Mm.
really trying to stay there.
Deuces. I hear that. Yeah.
So what I'm doing is y'all are scheming on me. I'm scheming on my next move.
I hear that. I
I
hear
don't
that.
really think I'm not really about staying and fighting a battle with any toxic environment. That's never going to be my advice. I understand
I've
people have,
done that.
children to
Yeah.
feed and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just be strategic. This goes back to your relationships. Start putting it out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you this on that same topic, just drawing out a scenario for you in terms of what you'd advise if you were objectively observing this. You have a situation where someone in the organization has come to you. It could be not Netflix, any organization. Someone in an organization has come to you and said, "Hey, you recruited me. I feel as though I feel some level of connection to you. I've been here 6 months. You know, John Doe has said such and such about me to my senior manager, and they believe this to be true. Now, I want to maintain my reputation, and I want to maintain my relationship with this organization. What's the best way to handle it? Should I address it with the person, my peer who did this thing, or double back around and go to my boss and say this person is lying? Do I call HR in and have an official inquiry made, or just ignore it and maybe it won't happen again? Like,
So you're saying you basically, if you're lied on in an organization,
You're lied on, you're
by
blamed
someone who's a peer of yours,
by someone who's a peer or subordinate. I think either could be good, but the person is considered to be in good standing in the organization.
and you're
Right?
not.
Well, no, we're pretty much equal. So we're peers or a subordinate. Something is said that's untrue. I can more or less prove this is untrue. How do I best go about it? Ignore it, address it at my peer level, go to my boss, bring HR in.
Well, first of all, I don't know what your proof is, but I believe as a Black woman in the workforce, you should always have receipts, period.
I hear that.
Like if I have a conversation with you,
yeah,
you're popping off, and we get to a place where I feel like we're, you feel me? Okay, good. We've had this conversation, it's squashed.
Yeah.
Guess what? The next thing Erica Sewell is about to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
For our conversation, email.
Create that.
I'm capturing it all. Okay. Especially when I think again, me and you are at a certain level of in our like maturity in terms of professionalism where our spidey senses can tell us when somebody's on something, right?
That's right.
So the second that you can see somebody's on something, that requires receipts. We're not having no conversations off the record. You're a lawyer, you know what it is.
That's right.
If it's something like an incident where you feel like, okay, I'm going to try to move forward so that I can continue to, maintain this. I'm not going to let this person ruin my job for me. It depends on your culture and environment. It depends on the dynamics. I don't want to speak out of turn, but from what you're saying, I would definitely address it with them first. And then I would recap that conversation.
That's right.
Per our conversation.
As we discussed. As we discussed. 3:33 in the afternoon.
I think there's a T-shirt now. Somebody has a T-shirt like per our conversation, per my last email.
Yeah. Oh, really? I want to see that.
You can do it in a way that it's casual, but Black people gotta have receipts.
That's right.
Speaking
of which, look what's going on. George Floyd. What would this conversation be if there wasn't video? If there wasn't video of that man's being murdered, like, come on, we'd be back trying to explain and investigate. And same thing with the other young man who got killed.
But that's why nobody's talking about Breonna Taylor. There was no video.
Right. That's right.
And she's a woman, but there's no video. Right. So people forgot she even existed because they haven't seen the endless loop of trauma of this person being murdered.
Yeah, we got to have receipts.
I'm tired. I'm so tired.
I think we all. I mean, in the rioting, or not, I won't call it rioting. The protest that we're seeing in Minneapolis is an indicator of that. We're just exhausted.
Yeah,
just exhausted. We want change, but bringing it back real quick, and we're almost about to close out. COVID-19 is a reality for all of us right now, right? So, in light of the changes that are going to impact our work relationships, social relationships, and obviously in entertainment business, like there's this very fine line between personal and professional. You know what I mean? We do drinks, we do lunches, we even sometimes go hang out in social things on the weekends with our colleagues, right? So in light of that all changing and probably creating a barrier to relationship building, what would you how would you suggest we adapt? And again, those of us who continue trying to build relationships and get closer and further advance our careers, how do we adapt to that, knowing that there's this barrier around socializing?
I think it's hard. It's tricky. I mean, I think I'm personally zoomed out. So I think at the start of this, I would have suggested, well, you could always do a video conference. You can do that type of meeting. While I think that has become the norm, I think for networking, like, people used to grab a drink or coffee. I don't know that I'm at a place where that's what I feel like doing right now. A non-agenda FaceTime or Zoom. Not there yet. And I feel like with all this reopening happening, I'm personally not on the side of the spectrum where I feel comfortable going out in the world masked. But maybe if that becomes the norm, then maybe it's a masked situation. But I feel like unfortunately for relationships, unless there's like an agenda, it's not just a casual. I think casual connects over. This is my personal opinion. These
Yeah,
casual
totally.
connects.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we know that me and you have been in talks about developing this book,
Mm-hmm.
that's not a casual connect anyway. We can call it that. We can say we're having coffee. So let's just be real about what it is. We having a meeting about this book, and then it is worthy of a Zoom, in my opinion.
Interesting. That's a really good point. I think you're not alone in that. That sentiment. And I think what you suggest is it could be effective. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Relevant. So
yeah.
All right, and let me ask you this now: those people out there that are finding themselves like off the job market or not in the job, not having a job, whether they were furloughed, recent grads, waiting to hear back, or they were laid off. Some are young professionals, some are older people, mid level, mid executive. Like, what could they be doing now to fortify their opportunity to secure a job when things do begin to settle, when the dust settles?
It's tricky, right? It depends on your situation. What I will say is there are people still hiring in entertainment. That is still happening. People are still reaching out. That's still happening. But I think that it's becoming a more competitive market because there's more people looking. So I think just focusing on the way that you kind of show up in terms of yourself versus competition is more important than ever now, right? Okay. I think there's a lot of people who have kind of rested on their laurels of being this coveted exec at this place, but now that they're not going to have that opportunity, they're in a different job market now. This is a different type of job market. There's less opportunities and there's more candidates. So it's really just about like how visible are you to be found as well, right? Like you might assume that everybody knows you, but the people might not have a link to the opportunities that are real. So it is about kind of making sure that there is a visibility and an accessibility of your profiles, your credits, whatever your particular niche is. It's about how are you going to maybe you've been working on something for 5 years that hasn't actually been developed. Well, how do we talk about that? How do we list that in spaces? Creatives are not really big on being on LinkedIn, but you really, really, really will be surprised how many people are looking for people on LinkedIn.
Wow.
So if you don't have an updated LinkedIn, it's time to dust that off. And I know that seems obvious, but also it's time to your point, I think even in the casual connect piece of it all, people have a tendency to send LinkedIn emails to people. Hi, I just wanted to chat with you about opportunities. That is not a good use of anyone's time. You should know exactly what opportunities you're looking for, and you should know what opportunities they're hiring for. You might not know the latter because they might not have it publicized, but if you catch wind of it, hey, I heard you guys are hiring for blah, 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 blah. I haven't seen a job posting. Here I am. But not just hey, I wanted to connect with you and talk to you about life.
Got it.
Nobody has time for that right now.
Nobody has time for that right now.
So step one would be update your LinkedIn, update your IMDb, your whatever, all your profile studio system. Make things feel and seem relevant. Don't forget about things that you don't consider to be worthy of listing. List everything. And then number 2 is reach out to people. Yes, people that you know, but also people that you don't know with specificity.
Be surgical. I like that. I like that. Well, look, Miss Sewell, this has been extremely engaging. I've enjoyed talking to you. I always like talking to you, but
thank
you. I like talking to you in this business capacity. Before we close out, is there anything you want to, mention, promote, shout out, anything you want to say before we close out?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know when this is going to air, but I am probably going to be doing, some of my colleagues started doing sort of resume workshops for people.
Oh, okay.
So I might be doing just a quick Zoom on just reentering the workforce and little tips and tricks. Okay. Don't know when it is yet, but I'll announce it.
Yeah, drop your IG, so because wherever it is, they'll follow.
For sure. So my IG is at escape_art. I don't know if people can see that on the chat. No, that you can't see the chat.
They
right?
can't see it, but I'm gonna put it through. I'm gonna put a link in there so they can connect with your IG and your Instagram and your LinkedIn, so they can find you and find Escape. And is that like? Where'd you come up with that? Just so we.
So Escape Art is the shortened version of Escape Artist. Escape Artist is my consulting firm that I've had. That's like the alias I've used and all of these random things that we haven't talked about career-wise.
The slush fund, where the dark money goes. Right?
Exactly.
To fund your trips all
that's where my
the globe.
Cryptocurrency is.
Yeah, I hear that. One minute she's in Honduras, next minute is South Nigeria, Ghana. So I mean, all over the place. So it's funny. I haven't seen you do a lot of traveling lately. There was a time when you were, globe trotting, boy. I was like, damn, where's she? But you'll be there. You'll be there.
At that time, I had more flexibility in where I could work from. I was always working though. That's the thing.
Yeah, no, I know you were. You was working up a whole lot of stuff, but you had some good trips. I gotta catch the next one you do though for sure.
Yeah,
but
2021, that's our year.
2021, let it come without any viruses. I guess we'll probably be all walking around with some kind of vaccine in our bloodstream. You know what I mean? But hopefully nothing that's gonna take us out. But let me close this out here. So anyone who wants to find more Brooklyn Boardroom content, feel free to go to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you go to find it. Make sure you subscribe. And then on Instagram, the handle is BKLYN Boardroom. That's BKLYN Boardroom. And the website is Brooklyn Boardroom, spelled out, brooklynboardroom.com. We welcome you to become a part of the community. So sign up, register, log in, whatever. Even give a donation. I'm just joking. Anyway, it's been a great time with you, Erica, and I'm looking forward to having more of these chats in the future. So you got to come back and do this again with us, okay?
For sure. Thank you for having me.
It was my pleasure. Deuces. Okay.